good evening. Settle yourself and let the room get comfortable around you. Pull the blanket up if you need it, turn the light down as low as you like, and let your shoulders come away from your ears. There is nothing here that requires anything of you. You may listen closely, or you may drift, and either one is a perfectly good way to spend the next couple of hours. Tonight, we are going somewhere you have almost certainly imagined before, though probably not accurately. We are going into the top floor of a tall house in an expensive London square in the 1870s to spend a day as a child of a very wealthy English family. Not a poor child, not a chimney sweep, not a factory hand, not one of the small, ragged figures who tend to fill the popular picture of Victorian childhood. The opposite, a child with a nurse, a governess, a country house, a father with an income most people in the country could not conceive of, and a wardrobe that costs more per year than a grown man could earn cutting stone. And here is the question underneath the whole evening. If you had every material advantage the 19th century could offer a child, what would your day actually feel like, hour by hour, from the moment the coal grate was lit to the moment the fire was banked at night? I suspect you already have an answer in your head, and I suspect it came from books. There is a version of this childhood that everyone carries, and it goes something like this. A rocking horse with a real horsehair mane by a sunny window. A pony in the country waiting. Cake endlessly, and jam, and nursery tea by firelight. A mother who is beautiful and warm, and always somewhere nearby, trailing scent, bending down to kiss a forehead. A father who is stern but secretly fond, who lifts you onto his shoulder in the garden. Snow outside, and a nursery so warm you can smell the toast. A childhood with no responsibility, no hunger, no fear, no work, no wanting. A soft golden cushioned thing. That version is not entirely a lie. Some of the objects are correct. There really were rocking horses, and ponies, and nursery fires, and toast held to the coals on a long brass fork. The material comforts were real, and I'm not going to spend 2 hours pretending that a rich child's life was secretly miserable, because it was not. That would be its own kind of dishonesty, and it would also be dull. But the shape of the day is wrong. Almost entirely wrong. Because the child in that storybook version is free, and the actual child was not. Consider this, and let it sit for a moment. The wealthy Victorian child was, by a considerable margin, the most supervised, most scheduled, most timetabled, most physically contained child in the entire house. More governed than the scullery maid, who at least had tasks she could complete, and an afternoon off once a month. More governed than the footman. More governed, in a very real sense, than the horses, who were at least taken out at their own pace and allowed to eat when they were hungry. Everything that child did was arranged by an adult, at a fixed hour, in a fixed room, wearing fixed clothes, for reasons the child was rarely told. When to rise, what to eat, and how much, and in what order, and how plain it should be. What to wear, and whether the buttons could be reached without help, which they usually could not by design. When to speak, which people in a public park could be addressed, and which could not. Which toys were permitted on a Sunday, and which were shut in a cupboard until Monday. When to go downstairs to see the two people who had made this whole arrangement possible, and precisely when to come back up. And that is the second thing that gets lost: the geography. Because when we picture a warm Victorian nursery, we tend to picture it as the heart of the house, and it was nothing of the sort. It was the top of the house, up under the roof, at the end of a back staircase, deliberately as far from the reception rooms as the architecture allowed. That distance was not an accident or an inconvenience. It was the design. Noise travels down, and a household of that class was arranged so that the noise of its own children would not reach the rooms where adults conducted the serious business of adult life. So here is the paradox I want you to carry with you through the whole of tonight, because everything else we look at is going to hang off it. Money bought this child absolutely everything, except the company of its own parents. It bought warmth in a country where warmth was expensive and rationed by income. It bought clean water, and a doctor within the hour, and clothes made to measure, and a bed of one's own, and enough food to grow properly, and books, and a tutor, and a piano, and an education in 3 languages. In a century where a great many children got none of those things, that is not nothing. That is, in fact, an enormous amount, and it bought all of it through intermediaries. The warmth came from a housemaid who climbed the back stairs with a coal scuttle before dawn. The food came from a cook the child might see twice a year. The teaching came from a woman hired for the purpose, who was genteel and educated and paid roughly what a skilled workman earned, and who was not quite family and not quite staff, and therefore lonely in a way the household never discussed. The care, the discipline, the comfort in the night, the hand on the forehead, the voice that knew which story you liked. All of that came from a nurse who had a wage and a half-day off and a room next to yours, and whose employment could end. The parents were downstairs, not absent, not cruel, not indifferent in most cases, and certainly not by their own reckoning. They loved their children in the manner their class and their moment considered correct, and the manner considered correct involved a great deal of distance and a very small allotment of time. 20 minutes to an hour in the early evening, in the drawing room, with the child washed and changed into its best and prepared to perform. A recitation, perhaps. A piece on the piano, played once through. A brief account of the day's lessons, delivered standing. That hour has a name. It was called the Children's Hour, and I want you to notice what a strange phrase that is. An hour out of 24, designated as belonging to the children, which tells you exactly what the other 23 were understood to be. Now, I'm not going to spend tonight scolding these people. That would be easy, and it would also be lazy, because they were not monsters, and they were not stupid. They believed, quite sincerely, that they were doing the right thing. They had medical opinion behind them, and moral opinion, and the weight of their own upbringing, and a firm conviction that too much softness in early life produced an adult who could not endure anything. Every one of the arrangements we are going to walk through tonight, the plain food, the cold water, the fixed hours, the enforced separation, was believed by intelligent, well-meaning people to be an act of care. That is the interesting part. Not that they were unkind, but that this is what kindness looked like when it was filtered through the ideas available to them. What I want to do instead is show you the day, the whole of it, in order, at the pace it was actually lived, which was slow. Rich Victorian childhood was slow in a way that is genuinely difficult for us to imagine now. Long empty afternoons in one room, with rain on the window and a clock on the mantel, and permission to do about 4 things. That slowness is, incidentally, why this makes such good listening at this hour. There is nothing urgent in it. Nothing is going to lurch. So we will begin before 6 in the morning, with a grate being laid in a cold room at the top of a house. We will go through the washing and the dressing, and I will show you what those clothes were actually made of, and why a child of 8 could not get into them alone. We will sit at the nursery table for a breakfast of deliberate plainness, while 9 courses are being planned 2 floors below. We will move at 9 into the schoolroom and meet the woman who taught there, and look honestly at what she earned and what became of her afterwards. We will look at what the girls were taught and what the boys were taught, and where those 2 roads went. We will walk out into the square and the park, 2 by 2, and learn which children could be greeted. We will spend the long afternoon among the toys, and I will tell you what they cost and what they were quietly training their owners to become. We will go downstairs for the children's hour. We will go to the country in summer and out to the stable yard and find the one invisible line that could only ever be crossed in one direction. And at the end, we will watch a childhood finish, which happened differently depending on whether you were the son or the daughter, and which is where the whole shape of the thing finally becomes visible. If you find this sort of thing pleasant to fall asleep to, do consider subscribing, since it genuinely helps these long ones find the people who like them. And if you are still awake at the end, or if you wake up somewhere in the middle of the country house, tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what the time is where you are. I am always slightly astonished by the answers. That is enough from me. Let the room go soft. Let the sounds of your own house settle into the background. Breathe out. It is the spring of 1876, and above a garden square in London, in a room under the roof, a fire has just been lit. The square itself is a rectangle of plane trees and gravel walks behind iron railings, and the railings have a gate, and the gate has a key, and the key belongs to the householders whose front doors face inward. That is the first thing worth knowing about where you live. The green space at the center of your world is private property held in common by about 40 families, and the children who live in the mews behind, in the rooms above the stables, cannot go into it. They can see it. They cannot open it. This will matter later, when we walk out for the morning air, but I mention it now because it is the clearest single image of the whole arrangement you have been born into. A tree you can touch, behind a lock you have the key to. The house is tall and narrow, and made of brick faced with stucco on the lower floors, painted a colour somewhere between cream and stone. It is one of a terrace of identical houses, and if you were set down, blindfolded at any front door in the row, you would not know which was yours until you were inside. 5 stories, counting the basement, counting the attic. About 22 feet wide at the front. Everything in it goes up rather than out, which means everything in it goes up and down stairs, all day, carried by hand. Your father is a barrister. That is worth stating precisely, because the word covers a wide range of incomes, and yours sits in the comfortable middle of it. He practices in chambers in the temple. He took silk 2 years ago, and in a good year his practice brings in something between £2,000 and £3,000. Underneath that there is land, a modest estate in Hampshire that came to him from his own father, which yields perhaps another £800 a year in rents after the agent is paid. So call it £3,000 a year, give or take, in a country where a clerk in a merchant's office is glad of 150, and a carpenter with steady work earns perhaps 80. Your family is not aristocratic. Nobody in it has a title, and nobody expects one. But you are inside the top 1% of English incomes, comfortably, and everything I am about to describe follows from that number. Your mother is 34, she was married at 22, has had 5 children, and has 4 living, and the shape of her day is calls, cards, correspondence, the ordering of a household of 9 indoor servants, and the dinners at which your father's professional standing is quietly maintained. She is not idle. She is not, in any sense that you will experience before you are about 15, available, and you are 8 years old. Second of the 4. You have an elder brother of 9, a younger sister of 5, and a brother of 2 who is still entirely in the nurse's hands, and appears in your life mostly as a noise from the next room. You were born in this house, in the room on the 2nd floor at the back, and you have never spent a night away from either this house or the one in Hampshire. Now, the geography. This is the part that people miss, and it explains more than anything else I can tell you. The house is stacked in layers, and each layer belongs to a different order of person. In the basement, below the level of the street, are the kitchen, the scullery, the larder, the servants' hall, and the cook's small sitting room. It is warm down there, and dark, and it smells of coal and stock and wet stone. Above that, at street level, the dining room at the front, and your father's study at the back. Above that, the drawing room, which runs the full depth of the house, and has the tall windows and the good carpet and the piano, and which is the only room in the building designed to be looked at. Above that, your parents' bedroom and your mother's dressing room. Above that, 2 more bedrooms and the schoolroom. And above that, at the top, under the slope of the roof, the nursery, the night nursery. And beyond a door at the end of the passage, 3 small rooms where the maidservants sleep. Count that. You live 4 floors above the drawing room and 5 floors above the kitchen. The people you are closest to in the world, by simple measure of proximity, are the housemaids sleeping on the other side of a lath wall. The people who made you sleep at a distance of some 50 feet of vertical brick and about 60 stairs. This was not accidental, and it was not cruelty. It was, if anything, thought of as good practice. The nursery went at the top because the air was believed to be better up there, away from the fog and the drains and the street dust, and because a top room got light from more directions, and because sound travelled downward far less readily than it travelled up. A child crying at the top of a house does not disturb a dinner party on the 1st floor. That is a design decision made deliberately in the plans by an architect before you existed. The whole building is arranged around the principle that the household should be able to hear itself think, and children are the loudest thing in it. So you live at the top, in what is genuinely a separate, small country with its own borders and its own government. It has its own crockery, thicker than the china downstairs, and chipped at the rims. Its own linen, marked with a different letter in the corner so the laundry maid can sort it. Its own fire, its own coal scuttle, its own hours, its own meals cooked in the same kitchen as everybody else's, but made plainer on purpose and carried up all those stairs on a covered tray. And it has its own ruler, who is not your mother. Let me set out who else is in the house, because the shape of the staff tells you the shape of the money. Below stairs, there is a cook, a kitchen maid, and a scullery maid. There is a butler, though in a house of this size, he is really a upper manservant who does the plate, the wine, the door, and the dinner. And there is a footman under him, tall, because tall footmen cost more and were meant to be noticed. There is a lady's maid for your mother, who dresses her twice a day and repairs and alters her clothes. There are 2 housemaids who do the fires, the water, the beds, the grates, and the endless carrying. And above all of them, at the very top of the house, there is the head nurse, and under her a nursemaid, who is 17. 9 indoor servants, a coachman and a groom who do not live in the house, but over the stable in the mews behind. And a governess, who arrives in the mornings for the schoolroom, and does not sleep here, though many families in this street keep theirs resident. Now hold that list against your own position for a moment, because it is stranger than it looks. In the domestic hierarchy of this house, you are, at 8 years old, above every one of those people in rank, and below every one of them in power. The butler will call you by a courtesy title and step back at a doorway to let you pass. He will also, without any hesitation, tell you that you may not go into the dining room, and you will not go into the dining room. The nurse will curtsy to your mother on the stairs, and then come back up and decide what you eat, what you wear, when you sleep, whether you may keep a stone you found in the garden, and whether the thing you did this morning is reported downstairs or quietly forgotten. You outrank her by birth. She governs you absolutely. Both of those things are true at once, and neither cancels the other. And learning to live inside that contradiction is one of the genuine skills of a wealthy Victorian childhood. You will spend your life afterwards among people who cannot understand why you are simultaneously so confident with servants and so oddly obedient to them. Here is the shape of the day that is about to begin, so that you know the ground before we walk it. The nursemaid comes in at 6 to see to the fire, or a housemaid does it before her. You are woken between 6:30 and 7, washed in cold water, and dressed. And dressing is not something you do yourself, for reasons I will explain in some detail, because the reasons are extraordinary. There is prayers, and there is breakfast in the nursery at 8, which will be bread and milk and porridge, and nothing else. At 9, you go down 1 flight to the schoolroom, and there the authority changes hands from the nurse to the governess, which is a border crossing that happens every single morning of your childhood, and which both women feel keenly. Lessons until noon. Then the walk out into the square or across to the park, 2 by 2 behind the nurse, in gaiters, in all weather short of actual rain. Dinner in the nursery at 1, which is the largest meal of your day, and is served at the hour when your parents are not eating at all. Afternoon lessons, or on some days, permitted amusements, which is the technical term for playing. Tea at 5, then washing again, and best clothes, and the descent of 3 flights of stairs to the drawing room for what the household calls the children's hour, which in this house runs from about 5:15 to 6, and is therefore accurately about 40 minutes. 40 minutes. That is the daily allocation of your mother, and when he is home in time, your father. Then the bell, and up you go, and prayers, and bed by 7 in summer light that has not begun to fade. Everything else, all the other 14 waking hours, happens at the top of the house in the hands of a woman your family pays about £28 a year. That is who you are, a child of the professional upper middle class in the spring of 1876, living in the best appointed nursery your parents can arrange, eating plain bread above a kitchen that is at this moment jointing a saddle of mutton for 8, holding a key to a garden that the boy in the mews will never open, and about to be woken by a fire being laid in a grate 3 feet from your bed. The coal has caught. The room is beginning, from one corner outward, to be warm. It is 6 in the morning, and the housemaid has already come and gone. You did not entirely wake for her. You are aware of her the way you are aware of weather. A presence in the dark at the far end of the room, the small industrial sounds of a grate being cleared and laid, the scrape of the shovel, the rattle of coal from the scuttle, a match, the brief, loud crackle of kindling catching. She has been up since 5:30. She has carried that scuttle up 3 flights of back stairs, and she will carry the ash down again. And she has perhaps 4 more grates to lay before the household proper begins to stir. She does not speak to you. Speaking to you is not her office. She is 14 or 15 years old, and she is the lowest paid person in this house. And in the whole arrangement of your childhood, she is the one you will remember least clearly and see most often. The room warms unevenly. Nurseries at the top of tall houses always do. Heat rises out of the grate and goes straight up into the cold air under the roof slates, so that the region within about 6 feet of the fire becomes genuinely pleasant, while the corner where the washstand sits stays at whatever temperature the London morning has decided upon. You know this geography with your whole body. Every child raised in a house like this knows exactly where the warmth ends. It ends at the edge of the hearthrug, and beyond that is the cold country you must cross to be washed. And then the door opens, and the person who actually governs your life comes in. She is somewhere in her 40s. She has been in this household for 11 years, which means she arrived before you were born, which means that in every practical sense, she has been there for the entire duration of your existence. She wears a plain dark dress and a white apron and a cap. She is addressed by the family as nurse, and by the younger servants as Mrs. Something, married or not, because a head nurse is given the courtesy title regardless. Your mother consults her. Your father, on the rare occasions he considers the nursery at all, defers to her. And you obey her in a way you will never in your life obey your parents, because your parents are an event, and she is the heir. She is paid, in this household, about £28 a year, with board and lodging, laundry, and beer money. Under her is a nursemaid of perhaps 19, who receives something nearer 12 or 14 pounds, and does the physical labour of the nursery, the carrying, the scrubbing, the endless washing of small garments. Between them, these two women cost your father something like £42 a year in wages, and rather more than that again in the food, fuel, candles and laundry that keeping them requires. This is worth slowing down for, because the number by itself means nothing until you set it beside something. A junior clerk in a city office in the 1870s, a man in a decent coat with respectable handwriting and no private income, might earn £80 or £90 a year, and consider himself to be getting on. On that sum he is expected to keep a wife, rent a small house in a new suburb, feed and clothe several children, and maintain the appearance of a gentleman, which requires a black coat and clean linen and no visible mending. He will keep one general servant, a girl of 15, who does everything, at about £10 a year. He will not have a nursery. His wife raises the children herself all day, without relief, and that is not thought of as a hardship. It is simply what a woman of that income does. Your father, then, spends on the two women who raise you roughly half of what an entire, respectable, clerical family lives on. And your father is not a rich man by the standards of the people your mother most wants to impress. He is a barrister with a decent practice and some land income from Hampshire. There are houses in this same square where the nursery staff runs to 4. What that money buys, precisely, is separation. It is important to be clear about this, because it is easy to imagine the nursery as an extravagance, a luxury, a nice thing purchased for the child. It is not primarily that. The nursery is a piece of household architecture designed to remove the noise, mess, illness, and unpredictability of small children from the parts of the house where adults conduct their lives. The child benefits, certainly. The child is warm and fed and watched. But the animating purpose of the arrangement is that a woman of your mother's class should be able to receive callers at 3 in the afternoon without a 2-year-old appearing in the doorway. And so the nursery becomes a country of its own, with its own borders and customs and, quite literally, its own possessions. You eat off nursery china, which is thicker and plainer than the china downstairs, and is bought specifically because children break things. You drink from a mug with your initial on it. Your linen is nursery linen, marked and counted separately, washed separately, aired separately. Your table is scrubbed deal, not polished mahogany. There is a fire guard bolted across the grate, a high brass one with a rail on top where wet flannels are hung to dry, and the smell of the nursery in the morning is the smell of drying flannel, carbolic soap, coal smoke, and milk. Everything you consume must be carried up. There is no lift in this house, no service hatch that reaches the 3rd floor. So every meal you eat has been assembled in a basement kitchen and carried by a nursemaid up 3 flights of uncarpeted back stairs on a tray, past the reception floor, past the bedroom floor, to you. Porridge that left the range hot arrives merely warm. Bread and milk arrives with the skin on it. When you are ill and the doctor orders beef tea, the beef tea makes that same journey 4 times a day. And in the evening the tray goes down again, and the water for your bath comes up in cans, and the used water goes down in the same cans, and no one at any point suggests that this is an inefficient way to raise a child, because the labor that makes it possible is cheap and abundant and is standing right there. Now, the nurse. She wakes you. She washes you or supervises the washing with an attention that misses nothing. She dresses you because you cannot dress yourself, for reasons we will come to. She decides what you eat and how much of it. She decides whether the day is fine enough to walk in. She decides which of your ailments requires your mother to be told, and which does not, and this is a considerable power, because your mother's knowledge of your health is almost entirely second-hand. She sits with you when you are feverish. She is the one holding the candle in the small hours. She hears what you say when you are frightened, and she is the person you call for in the dark, without thinking. She also administers every correction you will receive. In this household, correction runs to withdrawal rather than anything sharper. No jam at tea, no walk, an hour standing at the window, the loss of the wooden animals for a week. That is her decision to make, and she makes it without consulting anybody. Your mother would find it faintly indelicate to be asked. Consider what that means as a relationship. This woman knows the shape of your skull under your hair. She knows which foods make you unwell. She knows the sound of your particular crying and can distinguish it from your sister's at 50 feet through 2 doors. She has more detailed knowledge of you than any other adult alive, including the 2 people whose child you are. And she holds this position because she is employed. She was engaged with a character reference. She receives a wage on quarter days. She has 1 afternoon and 1 evening off a week, and 1 Sunday a month. And on those afternoons, she goes out into a city where she has, in all probability, no home of her own at all. She may have had children. A great many nurses were widows, or women whose own children were being raised elsewhere by relatives, or in an institution, because the position of head nurse is residential and does not accommodate a family. There is a real possibility that the woman who is at this moment buttoning your boots has sons and daughters she sees 4 times a year. This is not remarked upon. It is the ordinary arithmetic of domestic service, and everyone in the house understands it, and nobody discusses it. And here is the part that the nostalgic version of Victorian childhood always leaves out. She can go. She can be dismissed for a disagreement with your mother about ventilation, about diet, about whether you are being spoiled. She can be given notice when the youngest child leaves the nursery, because the household no longer requires a head nurse and a governess both. She can simply be offered a better place elsewhere and take it, as she has every right to do. And when that happens, the central adult of your life is removed from it in the course of a single afternoon, with a month's wages and a written character, and you are told she has gone, and the household continues. Children in these houses grieved that loss the way one grieves a death, and were expected to have done with it in about a week. The memoirs of the period are full of it, written decades later by men and women of 60, who can still describe the exact place on the stairs where they were standing when they were told, and who cannot, in the same book, tell you a single detailed thing about their mother's daily company. That is the bargain the money makes. It buys you a woman who is unfailingly present, competent, and warm, at a price your family barely notices. And it makes her presence conditional on an employment contract that nobody has explained to you, and that you would not, at 8 years old, be capable of understanding if they did. She is standing over you now, the candle in her hand, the fire behind her, throwing her shadow up across the sloped ceiling. She says your name, once, in the voice that means the day has begun. There's no sense in pretending to be asleep. She has known that trick for 11 years. So you get up. The floor is bare boards with a strip of drugget down the middle, and the drugget is where your feet go, because the boards on either side of it in February will wake you faster than any voice. The room is warming from one corner only. You can feel the difference across the 4 steps between your bed and the washstand, the way you can feel the difference between standing in sun and standing in shade. On the washstand, there is a china basin, a matching jug, a soap dish, and a small brush for the nails. The jug has been filled the night before and left standing, which means the water in it has spent 9 hours in a room that went cold sometime after 11. Nobody carries hot water up 3 flights for a child at 6:30 in the morning. Hot water is carried up 2 flights for your mother and your father, in brass cans wrapped in towels to hold the heat, and that is where the hot water stops. You pour. The sound of it is very loud in a quiet room. You wash your face and your neck and your hands and your wrists, and then your forearms to the elbow, because the nurse will check the elbows. The soap is carbolic, which is to say it smells medicinal and faintly of tar, and it is used deliberately for that reason. Carbolic acid had been in general household use for about a decade by this point, following its adoption in surgery, and a great many well-run nurseries had settled on it as the correct soap for children, on the theory that if it killed what caused infection in a hospital ward, it would do the same for a child's hands. The scented soaps, the almond and the violet and the glycerin, live downstairs on your mother's washstand. Yours smells like a chemist's shop, and will do so for another 8 years. And you will find as an adult that the smell of it can put you back in this room instantly and without warning. Then the hair. You sit on the edge of the bed, and the nursemaid takes it in sections and brushes it out, and the brush is stiff bristle, and she is not being unkind. She is following instruction. The standing belief was that the scalp required stimulation, and that 100 strokes of a hard brush, morning and evening, produced strong, glossy hair, and, in some formulations of the theory, a clearer head. Whether it did any of that is doubtful. What it certainly did was hurt, in a small, tolerable, daily way that you have stopped remarking on, because there is no point remarking on it. And then you are dressed. And this is the part that repays slowing down for, because the clothing of a wealthy Victorian child is not simply expensive. It is engineered, and one of the things it is engineered to do is make you dependent. Start at the skin. Next to your body goes a flannel vest, wool, sometimes called a chest protector, worn all year, including in August, because the medical consensus of the period held that chills entered the body through the chest and back, and that a layer of wool against the skin absorbed perspiration and prevented that. Over the flannel, a calico chemise or shirt, plain white cotton, washable, of which you own perhaps 8, because they must go to the laundry constantly. Then drawers, again white cotton, again plain. Then a bodice, sometimes stiffened with cording, which is not a corset in the adult sense, but does begin the work of training the body to a shape. Then a petticoat, sometimes two, one of flannel for warmth, and one of starched white cotton for structure. Then stockings, wool in winter, held up with garters above the knee, and boots that lace or button to the ankle, and take a full 4 or 5 minutes to do properly with a button hook. And then, over all of that, the dress. Count the layers if you like. Between your skin and the outside world, there are 5 garments before the dress goes on. 6 if the day is cold enough for the second petticoat. The whole assembly weighs a genuine amount, several pounds of it, and you have never once worn less. And so you have no idea that you are carrying anything at all. Children in these clothes ran and climbed and fell out of trees. They simply did it slower than we do, and washed more of it afterward. Here is the detail that matters most, and it is the smallest one. The dress fastens up the back, not at the side, not at the front. Up the spine, with anywhere from 12 to 20 small buttons, or hooks and eyes, running from the small of the back to the nape of the neck, each one requiring another person's hands. There is no arrangement of a child's arms that will fasten the 4th button from the top. The design is not accidental, and it is not purely aesthetic, though a smooth, unbroken front was certainly the fashionable ideal. A back fastening means a child cannot dress without an adult, cannot undress without an adult, and cannot alter what she is wearing during the day. It builds supervision into the cloth. Your mother's dresses fasten up the back, too, of course, and she cannot manage them without her maid either. The whole class is stitched into the same arrangement. But she is a grown woman who employs the person who dresses her, and you are 8, and the person who dresses you also decides your bedtime, which brings us to your brother, who is 5, and who is wearing a dress. This is the thing about Victorian childhood that reliably astonishes people who come to it fresh. Small boys in wealthy households were not put into trousers at birth, or at 2 or at 3. They were dressed in skirts, frocks, and petticoats, essentially identical to their sisters, from infancy until somewhere between the ages of 4 and 7, and photographs of the period are full of children whose sex cannot be determined by anyone who does not know the family. The practical justifications were real enough. Skirts were vastly easier for a nursemaid managing a child not yet reliably out of nappies. Skirts could be let down at the hem as the child grew, and a child grows several inches a year, and a skirt lengthened twice is cheaper than 2 pairs of trousers. Skirts passed sideways between siblings without regard to sex. And then, one day, on no fixed schedule, and by his parents' decision, the boy is breeched. He is put into a suit with short trousers, sometimes a knickerbocker suit, and his long hair is cut, and the change is absolute and public, and never reversed. It is his first genuine social promotion. There will be a small ceremony of it in many families. A present from his father, a visit from relations, a coin pressed into his hand by a grandmother. He is measured in the tailor's proper sense of the word, possibly for the first time. Nothing corresponding to this happens to you. There is no day on which you are given a different kind of garment and told that you have become a different kind of person. Your dresses simply get longer, an inch or 2 every year or so, until at around 16 they reach the floor, and that gradual descent is the entire visible arc of your progress toward adulthood. His is announced. Yours is a hem. Consider what all of this costs, because it is more than you would think and less than you would expect, and the difference between those two figures explains a great deal about how these households actually worked. A good, ready-made child's dress from a London draper in the middle 1870s ran somewhere between 8 shillings and £1, depending on cloth and trimming, with fine wools and silks for best wear running well above that. But a great many of your clothes are not bought ready-made at all. They are made in the house, or made by a visiting sempstress, engaged for a week at a time at perhaps 2 shillings a day, with her meals, working through a pile of cutting and stitching that would otherwise fall to the nurse. A yard of good printed cotton might be 6p or 8p. A yard of decent merino wool, 2 shillings or more. Set that against the arithmetic of a growing body. You will outgrow every single thing you own inside 18 months, and grow out of your boots faster than that. There are 4 of you. Multiply. So the garments move. This is the quiet system running underneath the visible one. Your outgrown frocks are unpicked, turned, the worn parts cut away, and rebuilt for your younger sister, who is 6, and who has never in her life had a best dress that was made for her first. Hems come down. Sleeves are reset. A skirt too far gone for a child becomes a pinafore, and a pinafore too far gone becomes cleaning cloths for the housemaid. And there is no point in the object's life at which it is simply thrown away. Nothing in this house is thrown away that can be turned, dyed, cut down, or given to a servant. That is not thrift forced by poverty. It is thrift as a moral habit, practiced in a household with 3 servants and a carriage, because waste was understood as a defect of character rather than a question of arithmetic. The nursemaid finishes the last button. You have been standing still, arms slightly out, for about 6 minutes. Then comes the inspection, and this happens every morning of your childhood without exception. You stand in front of the nurse in the light of the window. She looks at your hair, at the parting, at the ribbon. She looks at your collar to see that it sits flat. She says, "Hands," and you put them out, palm down, and she looks at the backs and the nails. And then she says, "Over," and you turn them. And she looks at the palms and between the fingers. If anything fails, it is done again, at once, without discussion and without heat. Failing is not a moral event. It is simply a task not yet finished. She nods. It is a very small nod, and it is the entire currency of approval in this room, and you have learned to want it. Behind her, on the table, the nursery breakfast has already been set out. It is on a tray, and the tray has come up 3 flights of back stairs from a kitchen in the basement, carried by a housemaid who has done this before you were awake, and will do it twice more before the day is finished. The food has cooled slightly on the journey. This is a permanent condition of nursery life in a tall house. You have never in your life eaten anything at the temperature it left the range. What is on the tray is this: a bowl of porridge, made with water rather than milk, with a little salt and no sugar. A jug of milk. Thick slices of bread, cut the day before, with a scraping of butter on some of them, and nothing at all on others. A pot of weak tea for the nurse, and for you, milk again, or milk and water in equal parts, if you are among the younger ones. On some mornings, boiled eggs. On some mornings, bread soaked in hot milk, which is the food given to the very youngest, and to anyone recovering from a cold, and which you privately think tastes of nothing whatsoever. That is the whole of it. That is breakfast in a house that keeps a cook, a kitchen maid, a scullery maid, and a cellar with wine in it that cost more per bottle than the nursemaid earns in a fortnight. Here is something easy to misunderstand about this. The plainness is not neglect, and it is not economy. Your parents are not saving money on your porridge. They are following medical advice that they believe in completely, that their own parents followed, and that fills the household manuals on the shelf in the morning room. The theory ran roughly like this. A child's constitution was understood to be excitable by nature, its nerves imperfectly settled, its blood too quick. Rich food, highly seasoned food, meat in quantity, anything sweet, anything spiced, anything served hot and savory and interesting, was thought to inflame that natural excitability. It would make a child feverish, or wakeful, or fretful, or wild. It would produce what the manuals called a heated habit of body, and a heated habit of body was understood to lead directly to a heated and ungovernable temper. Plain food, taken at fixed hours, in fixed quantities, was believed to produce a calm, obedient, physically steady child. You will find this stated flatly in the household guidance of the period. Children were to be fed simply. Sweets were suspect. Strong tea and coffee were forbidden to the young outright, on the grounds that they overstimulated the nerves. Meat was often restricted for younger children to once a day, sometimes less, and in some households not at all before the age of 7 or 8. Fresh fruit was regarded with genuine suspicion by a good many doctors who associated raw fruit with summer illness in children and advised that it be cooked before it was eaten. The stewed apple and the baked pear are not accidents of taste. They are prescriptions. So the porridge without sugar is a medical instrument. It is doing something to your character, or is believed to be. Now go 2 floors down, at the same hour, and look at what your parents are eating. The breakfast room faces east, because a well-planned house puts the breakfast room where the morning light falls. On the sideboard, kept warm over spirit lamps, there are covered dishes. Kidneys in a sauce. Bacon. Eggs done 2 ways. Cold ham. Carved. In the season, a cold game pie. And on a Tuesday, whatever the fish course produced the night before, potted and turned out. There is toast in a rack, fresh, made in the kitchen, and brought up in the last few minutes so that it arrives crisp. There is butter in a dish with ice under it in warm weather. There is marmalade and honey in the comb, and a pot of coffee, and a pot of tea, and the morning papers, and letters on a salver. Your father takes about 20 minutes over this. Your mother takes rather less, and often takes it upstairs on a tray, which is an accepted habit for a woman who was up until 1:30 the night before. And there is the whole architecture of the thing, laid out over 3 floors of one house at one moment on one ordinary Tuesday. Kidneys and coffee in the east light. Salted porridge under the roof. The same family. The same cook. The same fire, in a sense, since it is one range in the basement that produced both. Nobody in the house experiences this as a cruelty, and it is worth being accurate about that, rather than reaching for outrage. Your father was fed on bread and milk when he was 8, in a colder nursery, by a stricter nurse. He believes it did him good. He would tell you, if the subject arose, which it will not, that indulging a child's appetite is the first step in ruining a child's will, and that a boy who cannot go without sugar at 8 will not be able to go without a great many other things at 18. What the arrangement actually produces, though, is a kind of early and permanent education in scale. You learn very young that food comes in grades, that the grade you receive is fixed by who you are and where in the house you are sitting, and that the smell coming up the stairwell belongs to somebody else. That lesson will transfer. It transfers to seating at dinner, to who is announced first, to which pew, to which end of a table, to whose opinion is asked. The porridge is a small piece of a very large lesson about rank, delivered daily before the day has properly started. The table itself has rules, and they are not written anywhere, and you know all of them. You sit where you always sit. Places do not move. You wait until the nurse has sat, and until grace has been said, which is one short sentence, and then you begin. You do not begin before her under any circumstances. You do not speak unless you are spoken to. That is the great one. It is stated so often in the advice literature of the century that it becomes almost a definition of a good child. And in the nursery, it is enforced not by anger, but by simple non-response. If you volunteer a remark, nobody answers it. The remark is allowed to fall into the room and lie there. This is more effective than any reprimand, and you learn from it faster than you would learn from a raised voice. You do not reach. If you want the milk, and it is at the other end, you wait until somebody notices, or you go without. You do not ask for more. This is absolute. There is a quantity, it has been decided, and asking implies that the person who decided it decided wrongly. You eat what is on the plate. All of it. The nurse will look at the plate at the end, and a plate is not finished until it is finished. And you do not, ever, remark on the food. Not to praise it, and certainly not to criticize it. Comment on food is a mark of greed, and greed in a child is considered one of the more serious defects, well above rudeness, and somewhere near dishonesty. A child who says the porridge is nice has still technically been thinking about the porridge too much. This morning, your younger brother, who is 5, has decided against the porridge. He does not say so. He simply stops. His spoon goes down onto the cloth rather than into the bowl, and he sits with his hands in his lap and his mouth quite firmly shut, and he looks at the middle of the table. Nothing happens for a moment. The nurse goes on with her tea. The nursemaid, at the side table, goes on folding. Then the nurse says, without heat and without looking up, that he may finish it now while it is warm, or he may finish it at dinner when it is cold, and that either arrangement is entirely his to choose. That is the whole of the machinery. There is no argument, because an argument would require treating his refusal as a position rather than as a phase of the morning. There is no bargaining, because bargaining teaches a child that refusal has purchasing power. There is simply the plain arithmetic that the bowl exists. The bowl is his, and time is the only variable he controls. He holds out for perhaps 4 minutes. You have seen a sibling hold out for a whole morning once, and the bowl travelled with him from breakfast to the schoolroom windowsill to dinner, congealing. And by then, the thing had stopped being about porridge at all, and had become entirely about whether the world could be made to move. It could not. It never can. That is, in the end, the lesson the bowl is teaching. The other instrument, and it is the main one in this nursery, is the withdrawal of small pleasures. Not the walk, because the walk is medicine and is never cancelled. But the story before bed can be cancelled. The Saturday piece of cake, which is the one sweet thing in the week, can be cancelled. 10 minutes of the afternoon's permitted play can be cancelled. These losses are announced quietly, applied exactly, and never extended past the stated term. And the reliability of that is why the system works at all. Your brother picks up his spoon. He gets through it in silence, with an expression of deep and principled endurance. And afterwards the nurse says nothing about it whatsoever, which is the point. The incident is closed. It will not be mentioned at dinner. It will not be reported downstairs. Whatever happens in this room is settled in this room, by this woman, and neither your mother nor your father will ever hear a word of it. The plates go back onto the tray. The tray goes back down the 3 flights of back stairs to the basement, where it will be washed in its own set of bowls, because nursery crockery is washed separately from the dining room service, and it goes on to its own shelf, and it will come back up again at 1 o'clock with the boiled mutton. Your hands are clean, your hair is parted, you are fed. You have not spoken above 6 words since waking, and it is now, by the clock on the nursery mantelpiece, 9:15, which means the schoolroom. The schoolroom is the next room along, and the doorway between them is perhaps 4 feet of passage, and yet crossing it changes almost everything about who you are for the next 3 hours. In the nursery, you are a body to be kept warm, fed, brushed, and counted. In the schoolroom, you are a mind to be improved. The 2 women who govern these adjoining rooms are not friends. They are rarely openly hostile, because open hostility would be beneath them both. But there is a permanent low disagreement running between them about whose authority ends where, and you learn to read it before you can read anything else. The nurse has been in this house 11 years. She washed you the day you were born. She thinks the governess is an interloper with soft hands and airs above her station. And she demonstrates this by being scrupulously, unfailingly polite. The governess arrived 14 months ago. She thinks the nurse is an uneducated woman who has been allowed too much power over children who ought by now to be reading properly. And she demonstrates this by never once saying so. You are 8. You belong to the nurse until 9:15, and to the governess until noon. And you have already worked out that a complaint made in one room will not be believed in the other. Here is something worth slowing down for, because the governess is one of the strangest figures in the whole Victorian household. And the strangeness is not accidental. It is structural. She is a gentlewoman. That is the entire basis of her employment. Your parents are not hiring a servant to teach you. They are hiring a lady, because a lady's speech and manners and handwriting will transfer to you by proximity, and no amount of learning in a woman of the wrong class would do. She was raised, very probably, in a house not unlike this one. Her father may have been a clergyman, or a solicitor, or an officer, or a merchant, and then he died, or the business failed, or an investment went wrong, and there were daughters in the house with no money and no husbands and no trade that a gentlewoman could enter without ceasing to be a gentlewoman. There was one door left open, teaching other people's children in other people's houses. And so she is here, at the top of a house in a good square, 3 flights above the drawing room she would have sat in, had things gone differently, eating her meals sometimes with you, and sometimes alone, and belonging to nobody. That last part is the whole difficulty. She cannot eat in the servants' hall, because she is a lady, and the servants would resent her, and she would find it a humiliation. She cannot dine with your parents, except occasionally and awkwardly, when numbers require it, because she is paid. She has no equals in the building. The housekeeper outranks her in practical power and stands below her in social rank, and both of them know it, and neither can do anything about it. The wage. Let us be exact, because the number is the argument. A governess in a good London house in the 1870s, competent with French and music and a respectable reference, is paid somewhere between £30 and £80 a year, with board and lodging, and her fire and her candles found. A very grand household with a very accomplished woman might go higher. Many households go a great deal lower, and advertisements offering £20 a year were not rare. Say yours has £50. That is a comfortable figure for the profession, and your father is pleased with himself for paying it. Now, set it beside the other numbers in this house. The cook downstairs, who cannot write a decent letter and has never opened a French grammar in her life, has perhaps £40, and her food and her lodging, and, in many houses, her beer money on top. So the difference between the woman who instructs the daughters of the family in 3 languages and the woman who roasts the mutton is, in cash, about the price of a good winter coat and a pair of boots. But the cook has no expenses to speak of. The governess does, and this is where the arithmetic turns against her. She must dress as a lady, because looking shabby is the one thing that would make her unemployable, and dressing as a lady, even modestly, costs perhaps £15 or £20 a year, in a period when a housemaid clothed herself on 4. She must pay for her own travel between situations. She must pay for postage, and for the stamps on the letters that keep her in touch with the sisters, who are in the same position in other houses in other squares. She must buy her own books sometimes, and her own sheet music, and the little apparatus of her trade. And she must save. That is the part nobody says aloud in the drawing room. There is no pension, there is no fund, there is nothing at all standing between a governess and the end of her working life, except whatever she has managed to put away out of £50 a year while dressing herself like a lady. The mathematics are brutal, and everyone in the profession understands them. You are wanted most between 25 and 40. Before that, you are thought too young to command children. After that, families begin to prefer someone fresher, and each new situation is harder to find, and the wages offered to a woman of 50 are lower than those offered to a woman of 30, not higher. The governess's benevolent institution was founded in 1843, precisely because this arithmetic ended, over and over, in destitution. It gave small annuities to elderly governesses out of charitable subscription. Within a few years of opening its books, it was receiving applications in numbers it could not begin to meet. Hundreds of women applying for a handful of pensions. Each application, a life spent in rooms exactly like this one. That institution, by the way, is the reason Queen's College in Harley Street exists, founded to examine and certify governesses, which is how the first women's college in England came into being on the back of a problem nobody had intended to solve. Your governess knows all of this. She has read the letters in the newspapers about it. She is 31, and she has £11 saved. And she teaches you your copybook hand with perfect patience, 5 mornings a week. The schoolroom itself is a plain square room facing north, which is deliberate, because north light is even and does not move across the page as the day goes on. There is a long deal table with 2 forms drawn up to it, a bookcase with a glass front and a key, a globe on a stand, and a map of the world on the wall with a great deal of it coloured red. There is a fire, but it is a smaller one than the nurseries, and it is lit later in the morning, and there is a permanent quiet argument in the house about the schoolroom coal scuttle. Lessons begin with scripture, because they always begin with scripture. You learn the collect for the week by heart, and repeat it standing. Then a passage of the gospel, then the catechism, and the point of it is not principally religious instruction. The point is memory. The Victorians believe the memory is a muscle, and that it grows when loaded. And so a great deal of your education consists of putting text inside your head and taking it out again on request. And you will still be able to produce these words at 70 without effort, long after you have forgotten the name of the ship your brother sailed on. Then the copybook. This is the hour that hurts. The copybook is a slim volume with a printed line of perfect script at the head of each page, and the sentence is always a moral one, because the Victorians see no reason to waste the exercise. Diligence is the mother of good fortune. Procrastination is the thief of time. Idleness is the parent of want. You copy the line beneath it, again and again, down the page, and your governess walks behind you and corrects the angle of your wrist with 2 fingers. The pen is steel-nibbed, dipped in a well of ink that has been mixed from powder and water and is a little too thick this morning. The nib catches on the paper's grain and throws a blot, and a blot cannot be scraped out, and so the page is spoiled and begun again. Your first 2 fingers are cramped from the grip. There is a shallow dent in the side of the middle one, which will be there for the rest of your life. Arithmetic follows, and it is recited aloud in unison with your sister. The tables to 12, then pence into shillings, and shillings into pounds, which is the genuinely difficult part, because the currency runs in 12s and 20s rather than 10s, and a child in this room learns to convert 347 pence into pounds, shillings, and pence faster than most adults now can find a calculator. There are farthings and halfpennies and crowns and guineas, and the guinea is 21 shillings for reasons nobody troubles to explain, and you will use all of it, because managing household accounts will one day be your work. Geography is the map, and the map is a performance of empire. You learn the capitals and the principal rivers and the products of each red-coloured territory: cotton, tea, jute, wool, sugar, and the whole exercise arranges the world as a warehouse with London at the counter. And through all of it, the governess is teaching one lesson underneath every other lesson, which is stillness. Sit up. Shoulders back from the table. Do not fidget. Do not swing your feet. Answer when asked and not before. A great deal of what is being built in this room is not knowledge at all, but the capacity to be silent and attentive and physically composed for 3 hours together. Because that is a skill the adult world will demand of you constantly and will never again explicitly teach. The room smells of ink and coal smoke and the beeswax on the table, and there is chalk dust in the air near the slate, and the north light lies flat and unchanging across your page. Your governess bends over your shoulder, takes the pen out of your hand, writes one perfect capital letter at the top of the fresh sheet, and gives it back to you without a word. You copy the letter. You copy it 11 times, and the 11th is nearly as good as hers, and she nods once and moves on to your sister. And that is the whole of the praise available in this room on an ordinary Tuesday. But something has already changed in the schoolroom this year, and it has nothing to do with your handwriting. Until quite recently, you and your brother sat at the same table and did the same work. You both learned your letters from the same battered primer. You both recited the same scripture verses and were corrected in the same tone. Now, at 8 and 10, the table is quietly dividing. The lessons are separating like cream rising, and once they separate, they will never be stirred back together. Here is what your morning contains. Copybook hand, scripture, arithmetic, meaning the 4 rules, and the money tables. English grammar, out of a small green book with passing exercises. Then, after the 11 o'clock break, French vocabulary lists, verb conjugations chanted aloud, and eventually the reading of simplified fables. Drawing on Tuesdays and Fridays, beginning with cubes and cones in pencil, and progressing, if you show any facility, to watercolor landscapes and flowers. Piano practice for an hour, scales and simple exercises with the metronome ticking. Needlework, which begins with hemming and moves to marking linen with initials in cross-stitch, then to white work, then to the ornamental sort that will hang framed in a bedroom and prove something about you. Deportment, which is not a subject with a book, but an unbroken correction of how you stand, sit, enter a room, and offer your hand. Here is what your brother's morning is beginning to contain. Latin grammar, not Latin literature, not yet, but the declensions and conjugations drilled to reflex, because a preparatory school will examine him on them, and he must not disgrace the family in the examination. Arithmetic that pushes past the money tables into proportion and the beginnings of algebra. Some Greek, or at least the alphabet, and the first steps of the grammar, because Greek is coming for him at 13, and he had better not meet it cold. History as a chain of kings and battles and constitutional developments, treated as a subject with an argument in it, not a list of dates to be repeated back. The difference is not that his subjects are harder. Needlework of the ornamental kind is intricate and demanding and takes years to do well, and a great many boys could not have managed it. The difference is what the subjects are for. This is worth slowing down for, because it is the single most consequential thing happening in the schoolroom. And it is happening without anybody announcing it. Your education is an investment in your marriageability. His is an investment in his earning capacity. Both are investments. Both are taken seriously. Both cost money and time and adult attention. but they point at completely different destinations, and everyone in the house understands this perfectly, and nobody will ever say it to you directly. The word the period uses for what you are acquiring is accomplishments. It is a technical term, not a compliment. Accomplishments are the demonstrable skills a young woman can display in a drawing room to establish her class position and her family's investment in her. She can play, she can sing a little, she can sketch, she can speak French well enough to reveal that somebody paid for a governess. She can produce fine needlework. She can converse pleasantly on general subjects without embarrassing anyone. These are, in the most literal sense, capital. They are the assets you bring to a market. And the market is marriage. And the marriage will determine your entire economic existence for the rest of your life. Nobody is being cynical about this. Your mother genuinely wants you to play well, because playing well is a real pleasure, and because it will help you. Your governess genuinely believes French is worth knowing. The investment is honest. It is simply an investment with one purpose, and once that purpose is achieved, the asset is not expected to appreciate any further. Most of what you learn between now and 17 will be practiced intensively until you are married, and then set down. And the piano in your own drawing room will be played by your daughters rather than by you. There is a further consequence to educating a girl in the accomplishments rather than in a discipline. The accomplishments are broad and shallow by design. You will learn a little French, a little drawing, a little music, a little history, and you will be steered away from taking any of them far, because a woman who is very good at one thing is faintly alarming, and a woman who is pleasantly competent at 6 things is exactly right. The deep dive is not merely unnecessary, it is discouraged. There is a widespread medical opinion, published in respectable places and repeated by respectable people, that sustained hard study damages a girl's health and unfits her for the physical demands of her adult role. And so, an appetite for real difficulty in a daughter is treated as a symptom rather than a talent. Your brother is being pushed in exactly the opposite direction. He is being made to go deep, unpleasantly deep, into 2 dead languages, on the grounds that the difficulty itself is the point. Twice a week now, a tutor comes to the house. He arrives at 9:30, is shown up to the schoolroom, and works with your brother alone for 2 hours at the far end of the table while your lessons continue at the near end. He is a young man in his late 20s, a graduate of one of the 2 universities, taking pupils while he waits for a curacy or a schoolmastership. He is preparing your brother for the entrance requirements of a preparatory school in Berkshire, where he will go at 9, and which will in turn prepare him for a public school at 13, which will in turn prepare him for the university at 18, which will in turn deliver him to the bar, or the church, or the civil service. It is a conveyor. Every stage is designed to fit the next one. The whole apparatus, from that tutor at the end of your table to the day your brother is called to the bar, is a single continuous machine, and it has been built and refined over centuries, and it works. Nothing of the kind exists for you. There is no ladder. There is a governess, and then a better governess, or a finishing establishment for a year or 2, and then a drawing room. Now the money, because the money says it plainly and without any of the sentiment. The tutor is paid roughly 7 shillings and 6pence for each 2-hour visit, which across the school year comes to something near £30. The preparatory school in Berkshire will cost about £80 a year in fees, plus perhaps another 20 in extras. Books, laundry, sports subscriptions, the doctor, the journeys. The public school afterwards will run to 130 or 150 a year, and the university, with an allowance a young man can actually live on, closer to 200. Add it end to end, and your father will spend somewhere between £2,000 and £3,000 turning your brother into a professional man. Your entire education, from the day you enter the schoolroom to the day you leave it, is a share of the governess. She costs the household £45 a year and teaches 3 of you. Call it £15 a year for you, and add perhaps 10 more for the drawing master and the piano tuner and the sheet music and the paints and the copybooks. 9 years of that comes to something around £225. If a year at a finishing establishment in Brussels is added at the end, at £100 or so, you might reach 330. £330 against 2,500. Same house, same parents, same affection, as far as anyone can measure such things. And the 2,500 is not extravagance. It is a considered investment in an asset expected to produce income for 40 years. Your 330 is the cost of preparing goods for sale. The accounting is entirely rational once you accept the premise, and everyone accepts the premise, including, this is the part that lasts longest, including you. Return to the room. It is 10:15. Your governess has taken your sister into the small adjoining room to hear her scripture, and you are alone at the near end of the table with a page of French verbs, and the door between the schoolroom and the passage is standing a little open because the fire is smoking. At the far end, the tutor and your brother are working through a passage. You are not attending to it. Then a phrase catches, the way a phrase does, and you find you have stopped writing. He's being asked why the poet chose one word rather than another. Not what the word means. He has the meaning already. But why this one, in this position, with this weight? Your brother offers something. The tutor says no, think again, and waits. Your brother offers something else. The tutor says better, and now defend it. You sit with your pen dry in your hand. Nobody has ever asked you to defend anything. You have been asked to recite, to copy, to repeat, to produce, to perform. You have been asked 100 questions with one correct answer already known to the person asking. You have never once been asked what you think and then required to hold the ground. And you understand, in the way children understand things years before they can put words to them, that this is the difference. Not the Latin. The Latin is only a vehicle. The difference is that he is being taught to argue, and you are being taught to please, and that the 2 skills open onto 2 entirely different rooms, and that the door to his room was never locked against you, because it was never a door at all. It was simply a wall, with nothing on your side to suggest anything lay beyond it. Your governess comes back in. You dip the pen. You write the next verb, je serai, tu seras, il sera. I shall be, you will be, he will be. And the tense is the future, and you conjugate it neatly, and you do not look up again by 11:30, the schoolroom lets you go, and the house begins its second, smaller migration of the day. Coats come down from the hooks on the nursery landing. Gaiters are buttoned over your boots with a hook that catches the skin of your ankle if the nursemaid is hurrying, and she is always hurrying, because there are 4 of you, and only 2 of her hands. Your youngest sister must be got into a pelisse she has already outgrown at the shoulders. Your brother has lost 1 glove and is standing very still, hoping the loss will simply pass over him like weather. A hat, straw in summer, felt in winter, with an elastic under the chin that will leave a red line on your throat for an hour after you take it off. A handkerchief checked for. Hands checked for. The nurse looks at all 4 of you the way a sergeant looks at a line, and then she opens the door. Down the back stairs, because children do not use the front stairs at this hour, and out through the area door into the light. The walk is not optional, and it is not, strictly speaking, recreation. It is a fixed appointment, held twice daily in most households of your kind, morning and afternoon, in nearly all weather. Rain shortens it. Fog cancels it, though a London fog in the 1870s has to be genuinely thick before anybody calls it off. Snow does not cancel it at all. You will walk for an hour and a half, and you will walk in a particular formation, and the formation is the first thing worth understanding about it. 2 by 2, the eldest at the front, the youngest at the back where the nurse can reach them, and the whole arrangement moving along the pavement in a line. In the parks, you will see a dozen such lines converging by noon, each behind its own woman in a plain dark dress, and the shape of them all is unmistakable enough that people call it a crocodile. Nobody in the line chose their partner. You walk beside your sister because you are the 2 middle ones, and the pairing keeps the peace. And if you fall out of step or drift wide of the pair ahead, the nurse's voice comes down the line without her turning her head. You cross the square, past the railings, past the plane trees that will still be standing there 150 years from now, and into the gardens. Here is the thing that a modern listener finds hardest to hold about the wealthy Victorian child in a park. You are not there to play. You are there to be seen. The morning gardens are a stage with a very particular audience. Other nurses, other children, the occasional mother making the round with a companion, a gentleman crossing on his way somewhere. Every one of them is reading the group you belong to. They are reading the cut of your coat, and the quality of the nurse's dress, and whether there are 2 servants with you or 1. And from this, they are placing your household on a ladder they carry in their heads without ever having been taught it. And you are doing exactly the same thing back because you learned it before you could read. You know, at 8, which children may be spoken to. This is worth slowing down for, because it is easy to imagine that children's friendships in such a world formed the way children's friendships form, by proximity and accident and liking. They did not. A child's acquaintance was managed with the same care as an adult's, and by the same machinery. It works like this. Your mother pays calls. Calls are how a woman of her position establishes, maintains, and quietly declines connection. And she does it by leaving cards at houses in the square and the streets around it, and by receiving cards in return. If cards have been exchanged between your mother and another lady, then a relation exists between the households. If a relation exists, your nurse may permit you to speak to that lady's children in the gardens, and their nurse may permit the same, and the two women will stand together near a bench for 20 minutes, while you and their children conduct a stiff and rather formal friendship among the shrubs. If no cards have been exchanged, nothing happens. The other children may be 3 feet away. They may be your own age, in coats very like yours, with a nurse very like yours. You do not speak to them, and they do not speak to you, and neither of you finds this remarkable. And if you did speak, the nurse would remove you from the situation with a hand on your shoulder, and no explanation beyond, "We do not," and you would not ask why, because you already half know. The nurses themselves manage a great deal of this. They know each other. They know which households are rising and which are quietly in difficulty, which mistress is particular and which is not, which family is only renting for the season. They exchange information across the benches with a fluency that no drawing-room could match, and a considerable amount of what your mother learns about the neighborhood arrives by a route she would never acknowledge from her own nursery. So the walk is a lesson, though nobody calls it one. You are learning the map of who is above you, who is level with you, and who is not to be noticed at all. And you are learning it with your feet, in the open air, twice a day, for years. The open air is the other half of the point, and the Victorians believed in it, with something close to religion. The medical thinking of your century holds that fresh air is not merely pleasant, but actively curative. Bad air, close air, stale air, the air of a shut room, is understood to carry disease. And there is a rough sense in which this is not wrong, though the mechanism is misunderstood. What follows from it is a whole architecture of child rearing. Nursery windows opened at the top in all seasons. Bedrooms kept cold on principle. Children walked out in weather that would keep an adult indoors, on the reasoning that the cold hardens the constitution and the air scours the lungs. A child who does not get out is a child who will sicken. Your nurse holds this belief absolutely. She would put you out in the gardens with a streaming cold, buttoned to the chin, on the grounds that the air will do you more good than the fire will. And so the walk survives rain and wind and the general misery of a February morning, and you walk, and your hands ache inside your gloves, and nobody considers for a moment that you might stay in. There is a benefit hidden in all this, and it is real. You are a well-fed child who is outdoors for 3 hours a day, every day, in a century where a great many children are neither. Whatever else your childhood costs you, it does not cost you your legs or your lungs. The gardens give way to the wider park, and the noise of the road comes up to meet you. A barrel organ has set itself up near the gate, and the man turning the handle has a monkey on a chain in a small red jacket. The tune is thin and mechanical, and repeats every 40 seconds. Your youngest sister has stopped dead in the line to stare at it, and the nurse allows her perhaps a minute, no longer, because standing about is not what the walk is for. A penny goes into the tin. The line reassembles. At the crossing, the mud of the road has been swept into 2 neat banks, so that ladies may cross without spoiling their skirts, and the person who swept it is standing at the curb with the broom held upright, waiting. He is your age, possibly younger. It is difficult to tell, because he is small in the way that children who have not been fed properly are small, and his coat is a man's coat cut down, and his feet are bare on the stone in the middle of a London march. He works this crossing every day, all day, for whatever coppers are handed to him by people who have used the path he cleared. There is no wage, there is no employer. There is the crossing, and the broom, and the weather. He looks at you as you pass, because you are worth looking at. 4 children in good coats with 2 servants. And you look back, and for a moment the 2 of you regard one another across a distance that is about 4 feet wide and otherwise uncrossable. Your nurse gives him a halfpenny and moves you along. And here is the difficulty with that moment, which is that nothing in your world explains it to you. Nobody tells you he is poor because of any system. If it is explained at all, it is explained as station, or as providence, or as the natural order of a world in which some are placed high and some low. And the duty of the high is charity, and the duty of the low is honest industry. You will be taught to give. You will have a missionary box on the nursery mantelpiece, and you will be encouraged to put your own coins into it. You will be taken, when you are older, to distribute soup and blankets in a parish you would otherwise never enter. And you will be told that this is what people of your kind do. What you will not be taught is that the halfpenny, and the coat, and the nursery fire, and the crossing sweeper's bare feet are all parts of one arrangement, and that your comfort is not adjacent to his poverty, but connected to it, through rents and wages and prices, by a chain with no missing links. He will not be in your thoughts by the time you reach the gate. That is not cruelty. You are 8 years old, and you have been trained since infancy to see the social world as a set of levels that are simply there, the way the floors of your house are simply there. Kitchen below, drawing room in the middle, nursery at the top. And it does not occur to you to ask who decided the building should be built that way. The line turns for home. The nurse counts heads at the crossing, as she always does, and the count comes to 4, as it always does, and you go back up the square with your cheeks stinging and your appetite sharpened, which was, after all, the entire medical purpose of the exercise. Dinner in the nursery comes at 1 o'clock, and it is called dinner rather than luncheon, because the nursery keeps the older, plainer schedule of the household, and not the fashionable one. Mutton, boiled, with a caper sauce that appears twice a week. Potatoes, a milk pudding with a skin on it that the youngest will not eat, and will be required to eat anyway, cold at 1:30, while the others are permitted to leave the table. The nurse takes her own meal at the same board, at the head of it, and this is one of the few moments of the day when she is not standing. Afterward, there is a lull. It is the longest, softest, least governed stretch of the whole 24 hours, and it runs from about 2 in the afternoon until nursery tea at 4:30. In a life measured out in bells and lesson hours and inspections, this is the nearest thing you have to unowned time. It is not entirely unowned. The nurse is in the room, or in the room next door with the door open, mending stockings or writing out the week's laundry list. But she is not directing you. She is only present, the way weather is present, and within that presence there is a small country of your own. What you do in it is play, and the objects you play with are worth slowing down for, because the Victorian toy is not an afterthought. It is an industry, and by the 1870s, it is a large one. Consider what is actually in the nursery cupboard. There is a rocking horse, dapple grey, on a swinging iron frame, rather than the old curved bow rockers, because the swing frame is newer and safer, and cost somewhere between £2 and £3 from a London maker. There is a doll's house, 3 feet high, with a hinged front, made perhaps 15 years ago for your mother's cousin and passed along. There is a Noah's Ark, with something over 100 carved animals in it, most of them from the Erzgebirge in Saxony, where whole villages turned wood on lathes and painted the results by the thousand for export. There is a box of tin soldiers, hollow cast and painted, from Nuremberg. There is a doll with a wax head, glass eyes, and real hair inserted a few strands at a time, which cost around 15 shillings, and which you are not permitted to take near the fire, because wax near a grate is a lesson learned once and never twice. Here is the thing that is easy to miss. Very little of this was made in England. The German toy trade, centered on Nuremberg and Sonneberg and the mountain villages around them, supplied a great share of Europe's playthings on a system of piecework carried out in cottages. A father turning the shapes, a mother and children painting them, the finished goods collected by a merchant who packed them into crates for Hamburg and London. A carved sheep might pass through 4 pairs of hands before it reached your ark, and the total paid for all 4 pairs would be measured in pence rather than shillings. The doll's porcelain came from Thuringia. The tin soldiers came from Bavaria. So the nursery cupboard is a small map of European labour, and the children whose hands painted those animals were, in many cases, about your age, and were painting them for 11 or 12 hours a day. The animals arrive in your room 2 by 2, without a word of any of that attached to them. You will pair the elephants and set them walking up the little wooden ramp, and the whole apparatus of forests and lathes and crates and docks that put them in your hands is entirely invisible as the flights of back stairs that bring up your mutton. Which brings us to Sunday, when most of it goes away. The Sabbath in a household of this kind is not merely a day of church attendance. It is a day with its own rules for objects. The soldiers are put in their box, and the box is put in the cupboard, and the cupboard is shut. The doll is set aside. The rocking horse stands unridden. Card games, of course, are unthinkable. Even ordinary picture books may be replaced by improving ones, and in their place come the permitted Sunday amusements, which in a great many nurseries meant precisely one thing: the Ark. The Noah's Ark held its unique position because it was scriptural. You could not be accused of frivolity while arranging a story from the book of Genesis. Some households allowed it freely. Others allowed the animals to be arranged and named, but not to be marched about in any way that looked like play. There were Sunday jigsaw puzzles of biblical scenes, Sunday card games in which the cards bore the names of the prophets rather than suits, and books of scripture questions with answers to be memorized. The distinction being drawn is a fine one, and, to a child of 8, a bewildering one. The same wooden giraffe is devout on Sunday, and merely a toy on Monday, and nothing about the giraffe has changed. You learn the rule long before you have any interest in the reasoning. That is how most of the rules arrive. Now, look more closely at what you are doing on the ordinary weekday afternoons, because it is not idle, whatever it looks like. The doll's house is the clearest case. It is not, in a household like yours, primarily a fantasy object. It is a working model of a house very much like the one you are standing in, with a kitchen in the basement, and a drawing room on the first floor, and a nursery at the top, furnished with miniature copper pans and miniature dinner services, and very often a set of miniature servants, a cook, a housemaid, a nurse, in their proper dress. And what a girl does with it, encouraged by every adult who watches, is run it. She assigns the servants their places. She sets the table correctly for a dinner. She decides that the drawing room needs new curtains, and she makes them by hand in small stitches from a scrap of her mother's silk. That is household management practice, and everybody involved understands it as such. The advice literature of the period says so plainly. A girl's play with a doll's house was praised as training in order, economy, and oversight. The exact skills she would be expected to deploy over a real house with real servants and a real annual budget within about 10 years. Her doll is not only a baby to be loved, it is a dependent to be clothed, and clothing it teaches her to cut and fit and finish, and the dressing of dolls consumed an extraordinary quantity of girls' hours. Your brother's afternoon rehearses something else. His soldiers are arranged in ranks and given a battlefield, and the battle is very often a real one with a name attached, because he is being taught the history of campaigns in the schoolroom, and the two things flow together without anyone forcing them to. He builds fortifications. He commands. He learns, in the pleasantest possible way, that the world contains territory, and that men take it. His cricket bat in the country, and his lead battalion in the nursery, are pointing in the same direction, toward a public school, and after it a regiment, or the bar, or the church, or a district somewhere in India, with 100,000 people in it and himself, at 26 in charge. Neither of you is told any of this. It is simply that the objects placed within reach of a girl and the objects placed within reach of a boy differ, and children play with what is put in front of them, and after 10,000 afternoons, the difference has become a shape in the mind. But not every afternoon obeys the design, and this is worth saying, because it would be a poor account of a childhood that made it sound entirely like a machine. There is an hour, most days, when the nurse goes down to the housekeeper's room about the linen, and the youngest is asleep, and the schoolroom door is shut, and the top of the house belongs to you. What happens then is not in any manual. The hearthrug becomes an ocean, on the grounds that its border is blue. The overturned nursery chair becomes a ship with the legs for masts, and the fire irons are not to be touched, so the poker is a mast that must be imagined rather than used. The wooden animals are conscripted out of Scripture entirely and made into a crew, the two elephants improbably serving as officers. The doll with the wax head, who is far too grand for this, is left sitting upright in the window seat and given the role of a distant queen who must be sailed to. You invent a language for it. It has about 9 words. Your sister accepts the language without argument, which is the great thing about her, and adds a word of her own, and the word is immediately law. Nothing is being taught. Nothing is being rehearsed. No adult is measuring it. It is the one activity of the entire day that has no purpose beyond itself, and it lasts perhaps 40 minutes, and it will be dismantled in 90 seconds when the stairs creak, because the chair must be upright, and the animals must be in their box before the door opens. That is the real geography of a wealthy Victorian childhood. A great many rooms, a great many objects, a great deal of money spent on both, and inside all of it, a small unmapped country, roughly the size of a hearthrug, entered without permission, and vacated at the sound of a footstep. The stairs creak. The chair goes upright. The elephants go back 2 by 2. And by the time the door opens, the room is exactly as it should be. And the nurse says that tea is coming up. And you say yes. And the ocean is a rug again. Tea in the nursery is at 4:30, and it is the shortest meal of the day, because everyone in the room knows what follows it. At 5:15, the nurse begins, faces first, with a flannel wrung out in water that has been standing since morning and has gone the temperature of the room. Behind the ears, under the chin, the backs of the hands, the palms, and then the hands again, because the first attempt was not sufficient. Hair is the long part. Your sister's is brushed, and then plaited, and then the plait is undone because the parting was crooked. And she stands absolutely still through all of it, because standing still is the only way to make it end. Yours is brushed straight back from the forehead, hard enough that your eyebrows lift, and the brush is drawn through in long strokes that have nothing to do with tidiness, and everything to do with obedience being visible on a person's head. Then the clothes, not the morning frock, which has ink on the cuff and a smear of something on the hem from the park. The other one, it comes out of the press with tissue paper still folded around the sleeves, and it smells faintly of camphor and cedar, which is the smell of clothes that spend most of their existence not being worn. It buttons up the back, 22 of them, and the nurse does them from the bottom. And you count them because you always count them, and because it is something to do with your mind while your body is being assembled. Boots are changed. Not the outdoor ones, which are put away with the day's mud still drying on them, but the thin indoor pair with the buttons that require a hook. Stockings are checked at the knee for holes. A handkerchief is folded into the pocket, and it is a clean handkerchief, and everyone understands that it is decorative and that using it would be a mistake. You are inspected. Turn around. Turn back. Hands out, palms up, palms down. Chin lifted. The nurse looks at you the way a groom looks at a horse before it goes into the ring, with a professional eye entirely free of sentiment, because your appearance for the next hour is a report on her competence, and she knows it better than you do. And then, at 5 o'clock, the descent. 3 flights. From the nursery landing down past the schoolroom, past the closed doors of rooms you have no business entering, past the second floor where your parents' rooms are, and where the carpet changes, becoming suddenly thicker under your thin soles, so that your own footsteps go quiet. That change in the carpet is the first signal. Above it, sound travels and nobody minds. Below it, the house begins to absorb you. You go down in order. oldest first, holding the rail, not speaking. The nurse comes to the turn of the stairs and no farther. She hands you over to the landing, the way a boat hands over cargo to a dock. The drawing room, when the door opens, is a foreign country, and you have a visitor's papers for exactly 1 hour. The heat is the first thing. 2 fires in the house are kept properly banked all day, and this is one of them. And the room holds warmth in a way the nursery under the roof never manages. Then the light. Lamps with etched glass shades, and candles on the chimney-piece, and the fire, so that everything in the room is lit from 3 directions at once, and nothing casts a single hard shadow. The nursery has 1 lamp and a grate. This room has light the way a jeweller's window has light. Then the smell, which is hothouse flowers, and something of your mother's, and coal that has been burning cleanly for hours, rather than being coaxed out of a small grate by a housemaid at 6 in the morning. There are white flowers in a bowl on a stand near the window, and they are out of season, which is the entire point of them. And they came from a nursery garden in the suburbs by cart that morning, and cost more than the housemaid earns in a fortnight. Your mother is at the tea table. The tea things are silver, and there is a small spirit kettle, and she is dressed for dinner already, or nearly, because dinner is at 8, and the transformation between one and the other takes an hour of somebody else's labor. She looks up, and she smiles, and she says your name, and she means it, and it is genuinely the best moment of your day. She is also, in a sense you cannot articulate at 8 years old, but understand perfectly, receiving you. Here is the part that seems strangest looking backward, and it deserves to be understood on its own terms, rather than dismissed. The distance between a wealthy Victorian mother and her children was not an accident of busyness. It was a considered position, argued in print, recommended by physicians, and adopted deliberately by intelligent people who believed they were doing right. The reasoning ran along several lines at once. There was the medical line, which held that a child's constitution was delicate, and that the atmosphere of adult rooms, late hours, rich air, excitement, was actively harmful to a developing nervous system. There was the moral line, which was stronger, and which held that constant maternal presence produced a spoiled, clinging, self-important child, and that character was built the way a plant is staked, by firm external structure applied early and consistently. Indulgence was understood as a form of neglect. A mother who could not bear to let a child cry was thought to be serving her own feelings rather than the child's future. And there was the practical line, which nobody stated in those words, but which sat underneath the others. A woman of this class had a job. She ran the house, managed a staff of 6 or 7, kept the visiting book, arranged and executed a dinner for 14, and maintained the family's standing in a network of obligation that had to be tended weekly, or it decayed. Her days were full of work that produced nothing visible and could not be delegated to anybody who was not herself. The children were staffed. The dinner was not. So she engaged a head nurse at £28 a year and a governess at 40, and she delegated the hours, and she kept the hour. What she did not delegate was this one. Between 5 and 6, every day she was at home, in the good room, with the good light. She saw her children. Understand what that hour actually was, because it was not idleness. You are expected to perform. Not in a cruel sense, and not without warmth, but the hour has a shape, and the shape is assessment. Your sister goes to the piano and plays the piece she has been working at for 11 days, and she plays it with 2 mistakes, and your mother says it is coming on very well, and that the left hand wants more practice, which is true. You are asked to say your recitation, and you stand on the hearthrug with your hands behind your back and give 18 lines of verse learned that morning from the copybook, and you lose the thread once at the 10th line, and your mother waits without helping, and you find it again, and she says good, quietly, and that quiet good is worth more to you than anything anyone has said to you all day. The younger one, who is 4, is not asked to do anything, and is allowed to lie against your mother's skirts and be stroked on the head like a spaniel. And you notice this, and you are old enough now to know that you have moved past the age when that was available, and not old enough to have stopped minding. Your father comes in at 5:20 from chambers, still with the smell of the street on his coat. He is not unkind, and he is not effusive. He asks what you did in the schoolroom. He asks your brother the same, and then asks him a question in Latin. And your brother answers it wrongly, and your father corrects him without heat, and moves on. He asks you nothing in Latin. He asks whether you have been reading, and you say the name of the book, and he says it is a good book, and he pours himself something from a decanter, and stands with his back to the fire. And that is the extent of it, and it lasts perhaps 6 minutes. There is cake. There is always cake at this hour, and it is better than anything served upstairs. Seed cake, or a slice of something with almonds, and you are given 1 piece, and there is no possibility of a second, and you eat it slowly on purpose. And there is a stretch near the end. That is the real thing. Your mother puts down the tea things and takes the youngest onto her lap and reads aloud for perhaps 1/4 of an hour, and all 4 of you arrange yourselves on the carpet within the circle of the lamp, and nobody is being assessed, and the room is warm, and her voice is doing the thing that a voice does when it is not giving instructions. That 1/4 hour is the reason the whole apparatus of the day is bearable. It is real. It is not a performance, and she is not pretending. Then the clock on the chimney-piece strikes 6. She closes the book at the end of the sentence, not the end of the page. That detail stays with people. Everyone who wrote about this hour later, and a great many of them did, remembered the closing of the book mid-page, because it announced that the hour was not a length of time, but an appointment, and appointments end where the clock says, and not where the story does. You are kissed, each of you in order, and it is not perfunctory. Then the door, and the landing, and the nurse waiting at the turn of the stairs, and the carpet under your feet going thin again at the 2nd floor, so that your footsteps come back to you. Buttons undone in the cold. Best frock folded into tissue. Nightgown, and the fire in the nursery grate already dying, because coal upstairs is measured differently than coal downstairs. What you understand, lying in the dark, is not resentment. You have nothing to compare this against. What you understand is smaller and more accurate than resentment. You understand that you have been visited, and that they were glad to see you, and that being glad to see someone is a different thing from living with them, and that the difference is a flight of stairs and a change in the carpet, and that tomorrow at 5 o'clock it will happen again exactly the same way. In the last week of July, the house begins to come apart in an orderly way. You notice it first in the hall, where the umbrella stand has been moved to make room for a trunk with brass corners and your father's initials on the lid. Then a second trunk. Then the flat tin box that holds the plate, which travels wrapped in green baize and is carried by 2 men rather than 1. The drawing room curtains come down and go to be beaten. The chandelier is put into a bag of muslin like a bird under a cloth, and the carpets are rolled and stitched into sacking with camphor scattered along them against moths, so that for a fortnight the whole ground floor smells medicinal and empty, and your voice comes back at you from the bare boards in a way it never does in winter. Upstairs the nurse is making her own inventory, and hers is longer. Flannel, because Hampshire is cold at night even in August. Boots for wet grass. The medicine chest, which she packs herself and lets nobody touch. Slates, copybooks, the French grammar, because the governess is coming too, and the lessons do not stop simply because the walls change. 2 dolls out of the 6, chosen by her and not by you. The nursery is stripped down to its furniture, and the furniture looks wrong without its clutter, the way a room does when you see it very early in the morning. The railway journey takes rather more than 3 hours from Waterloo, and you travel second class, which will sound strange until you understand who is travelling with you. Your parents go first. The nurse, the nursemaid, the governess, your father's man, and your mother's maid go second. And you go with the nurse, because children belong wherever the nurse is. The cook and the kitchen maid went down 3 days ago to open the house and light the range, which takes a full day to come up to heat after standing cold. The housemaids stay in London to clean what has been emptied. The house you are leaving will not be shut entirely. A caretaking pair will live in the basement all summer with the shutters closed above them. And that arrangement costs money too. This is worth slowing down for, because the migration is not a holiday in the way you might think of one. It is a business moving premises. A household of this kind, with 2 properties and something over a dozen people on the wage book between them, spent perhaps 1/5 of its whole domestic outlay simply on the fact of having 2 houses instead of 1. Rates on both, coal for both, wages for the pair who mind the empty one, carriage of luggage, and the horses, which had to be got down to Hampshire by road in stages, because railway companies charged a great deal to take a horse anywhere. The advice manuals of the period discuss the move with the seriousness of a military operation, and the mistress of the house is expected to have the whole thing in her head, and the head nurse is expected to have the whole of the nursery, half of it in hers. And there is a second, quieter distinction inside the move, which children notice long before they can name it. Some servants travel, and some do not. The ones who travel are the ones attached to persons. The maids, the man, the nurse, the cook. The ones who stay are the ones attached to the building. To travel with the family is a mark of standing within the staff, and it is understood as such below stairs, and discussed there. Nobody explains this to you. You simply learn, by the 4th or 5th summer, which faces will be at the other end of the journey, and which will not, and that this has nothing at all to do with which of them you like. Then the branch line, and the fly from the station, and the lodge gates, and the whole tone of your life changes. The first freedom is the simplest one. There is no crocodile. There is nowhere to walk 2x2 to, because the park is not a public park, and the lanes are not streets. And so the rule that has governed every outdoor hour of your London life simply ceases to have anything to attach itself to. The nurse's authority does not weaken exactly, but it loosens at the edges. You are told to be back for dinner at 1. Between breakfast and 1 o'clock, if the weather is dry, a good deal of the time is genuinely yours. You spend it in the stable yard, most of it, because the stable yard is the most interesting place in England. There is the smell of it, hay and ammonia, and saddle soap, and hot metal from the forge, if the smith is up from the village. There is the groom, who does not talk to you the way indoor servants talk to you, and who will let you hold a bridle if you hold it properly, and will say so, unimpressed, if you do not. There is the pony, who is 14 years old, and has taught 11 children to ride, and is bored by all of you. And there is the gamekeeper's dog, a rough-coated thing, with one ear inside out, who is not allowed in the house, and who therefore belongs entirely to the outdoors, and to whoever is standing in it. The kitchen garden is the other kingdom. Brick walls holding the day's heat into the evening, espaliered pears nailed flat against them, the frames and the melon pit, gooseberries you're not supposed to eat and eat anyway. And the head gardener, who is a considerable person, has 3 men under him, corresponds with seedsmen, and regards the family as a seasonal inconvenience visited upon a garden that is otherwise perfectly well run. He will let you carry a trug. He will not let you near the peaches. Here is where the summer starts, teaching you something the winter never had occasion to. In London, every other child you saw was either brought to you in a drawing room or walked past you in a park. In Hampshire, the children are simply there, in the yard and the lane and the field. The groom's 2, the laundrymaid's boy, the tenant farmer's 4, the cottager's children who are working already at 8 and 9, scaring rooks off the seed, minding a younger one on a hip, taking a can of tea out to men in a harvest field. You play with them. Everybody's memoirs say so, and they say so with a particular warmth, because it is the only genuinely unmanaged company most of these children ever had. You learn where the wasp's nest is. You learn to gate vault. You are taught by someone 6 months older than you and immeasurably more competent how to get a fish hook out of a thumb. And you may cross that line in one direction only. You may go into the gamekeeper's kitchen and be given bread and dripping and sit on the settle by the fire, and nobody thinks any harm of it, and the gamekeeper's wife is pleased. Those children may not come into your nursery. Not once, not on a wet afternoon, not for a birthday. The permission runs downhill and never up, and it expires. At about 11, and rather earlier for boys who are going away to school, the arrangement is quietly ended by the adults, and the farm children begin to call you Miss or Master, and touch a cap, and the ones who taught you to vault a gate become, in the space of 1 summer, people you nod to from a pony. Nobody is cruel about it. That is what is worth noticing. It is done gently, by degrees, with no scene, and it is done in every such household in the county in the same year, and it is one of the ways this society made quite sure of itself. The other great interruption of the summer, and of every season, is illness. You will spend some part of most years in a darkened room. The list is long and familiar. Measles, whooping cough, scarlet fever, mumps, chicken pox, the endless colds and sore throats. The country was thought to be safer than town for this, and in the matter of clean air it broadly was, though a bad well could undo all of it in a fortnight, and a great many country houses had bad wells. The sick room has its own arrangement, and the arrangement is the nurse's. Curtains half drawn, the fire kept in whatever the month, the door shut, and the other children moved out of the room, and quite often out of the house altogether, sent to an aunt for 3 weeks. Beef tea, barley water, arrowroot, the particular boredom of being not ill enough to sleep and too ill to be read to for long. The doctor comes, and here is a plain fact about your position. He comes, and he comes again the next day, and he charges perhaps half a guinea for the visit, and your father pays it without discussion. The cottage a mile off does not send for him at all for the same symptoms, and if they do send, it is once at the end, and the bill is a real question. That difference in access is the single largest material advantage your money buys you as a child. Not the pony, not the doll's house. The doctor, twice a day, for as long as it takes. And even so, you should know, because it explains so much about how these families behaved and wrote and remembered, that a nursery of 4 in 1876 was not confidently expected to remain a nursery of 4. Across the country as a whole, something near 1 child in 7 did not reach its 5th birthday. And though the figure for houses like yours was markedly better, better is not the same as safe. Almost every large family of the period had a chair at the schoolroom table that was set for a while, and then quietly not set, and a name that continued to be spoken at prayers, and a photograph on a landing that the younger ones grew up knowing, without ever quite being told. That is why the nurse packs the medicine chest herself. That is why she will not let you sit on wet grass, and why the flannel comes to Hampshire in July, and why she counts you, without appearing to, every single time you come in from the yard. You think she is being strict. She is being careful, which is a different thing, and she has reasons you are much too young to be given. Your brother goes to school in the September, after he turns 9. It has been coming for a year. You have heard it discussed over the tea table downstairs in the way adults discuss a thing that is already decided, weighing schools the way they weigh horses. This one healthy, that one damp, this one with a headmaster your father was at Oxford with. A preparatory school in Berkshire, 40 boys, a chapel, a cold river nearby that they are all made to swim in during the summer half. His trunk stands in the hall for 3 days before he goes, corded and labelled, and the label has his initials on it in white paint, because at school nothing will be his unless it is marked. The nurse sews name tapes into everything. 12 shirts, 6 nightshirts, stockings, a Sunday suit, a Bible, a hairbrush. She does this in the evenings with her spectacles pushed up and her mouth full of pins, and she does not say anything sentimental about it, because she has done it before for other boys in other houses, and she will do it again. But she sews the tapes very slowly, and she checks the stitching twice. He goes on a Tuesday morning. Your father takes him to the station. Your mother says goodbye in the hall, briskly, with a hand on his shoulder rather than an embrace. because a boy who is going to school must not be given anything he might have to fight to keep from crying over on the platform. You are allowed to stand at the top of the stairs and watch. He looks up once. Then the front door shuts, and the hall clock goes on ticking, and the house begins the very strange business of continuing without him. What you notice first is the noise, or rather, the absence of a particular noise, which is the noise of somebody coming up the last flight of stairs, 2 at a time. The schoolroom has 1 desk unused. The nursery table is laid for 3. At the children's hour, the drawing room is quieter, and your mother asks about his letters and reads pieces of them aloud. And you understand that he has become a subject of conversation rather than a person in the room. He will come home at Christmas, and he will be changed, and everyone will pretend not to notice. He will have a new way of standing. He will call the nurse by her surname without the honorific, and then flush when she looks at him. He will have learned that crying is the worst crime available to him, and he will have learned it thoroughly. Something has begun in him that will not stop until it puts him behind a desk, in a set of chambers, or a regiment, or a country parish. And everyone in the house, including him, believes this is what a boy is for. Nothing begins in you. That is the difference, and it takes you several years to see it. Your own leaving of childhood is not an event. It has no trunk and no station and no white paint. It is a gradual narrowing, so slow you cannot name the day it starts. The schoolroom simply changes its subjects. Somewhere around 13, the arithmetic thins out and stops. Scripture stays. History becomes a matter of kings and dates rather than causes. French continues and German is added, and the drawing master comes on Thursdays, and the hours at the piano lengthen until you can play 3 pieces from memory well enough to survive a drawing room. The needlework becomes finer and more decorative and less useful. You learn to arrange flowers. You learn how to enter a room, how to sit for 2 hours without leaning back, how to be interesting to a stranger for 11 minutes, and then release him gracefully to somebody else. None of this is stupid. Set that idea aside, because it is the easy modern reading, and it is wrong. Managing a household of 9 servants and £400 a quarter takes real skill. Running a dinner for 16 people who dislike each other in various combinations takes real skill. The French is real French. The music is real music, and some women of your generation played extremely well, and a few of them wrote, and a very few published under their own names. But look at the shape of it. Everything you are being taught is being taught for use inside one building, in one role, in service of one household that has not yet been chosen for you. Your brother is being taught things that travel. Latin grammar is a passport, tedious and inflexible, but it opens the university, and the university opens the bar, and the church, and the civil service, and India. You are being taught the interior of a house. Consider the 2 exits from childhood side by side, because they are the whole argument of tonight in one comparison. He leaves at 9 and goes outward. School, then a public school at 13, then perhaps the university at 18, then a profession. At every stage he is examined, and the examinations are miserable, and they are also the mechanism by which he can be judged on something other than who his father is. If he does badly, there are consequences, and if he does well, there are rewards, and either way the assessment belongs to him. by 25, he will have an income of his own, however small, from something he did. You leave at 17 and go inward into the drawing room, and the drawing room opens onto other drawing rooms. You will be presented. There will be a season, and the season will cost your father somewhere between £600 and £1,000, which is more than your governess earned in her entire working life, spent in 4 months on dresses, a carriage, flowers, and a series of evenings in hot rooms where you will be looked at by people assessing your family's money and your health and your manner. This is not cruelty. It is a marriage market operating with perfect efficiency, and everybody in the room knows exactly what it is, which is why everybody is so relentlessly polite. And at the end of it, if all goes as your parents hope, there is a settlement. Here is what a marriage settlement actually was, because the word sounds soft and the document is not. It is a legal instrument drawn up by 2 firms of solicitors, negotiated between your father and the father of the man in question, specifying what capital comes with you, how it is invested, who receives the income from it, what you are allowed in pin money each year for your own clothes and charities and small pleasures, and what you will have if you outlive your husband. It is careful, and it is often genuinely protective, and by the 1870s, a good settlement could tie up your capital in trust, so that a reckless husband could not spend it. Women's property law was beginning to move in these same years. Slowly, in stages, every signature on that document belongs to a man. Your father's, his father's, 2 solicitors, trustees who are usually uncles or family friends. The subject of the deed, the person whose entire adult financial existence it arranges, sits in another room and is told afterwards that everything has been settled very satisfactorily. That is the exit. That is the door out of the nursery for you. Now hold both things at once, and do not let go of either, because the honest account requires both. The money was real. It bought you a doctor who came twice a day when a cottage a mile off could not send for one at all. It bought you warmth and enough food and a room of your own by the time you were 12, and a body that grew straight, and teeth and years. It bought you literacy and 2 modern languages and music, and the habit of reading, at a time when a girl born in the next parish went into service at 12 and could sign her name and little else. It brought you the near certainty that you would never be cold, never be hungry, never be afraid of the rent. Those are not small things. They are the largest things there are. And it is a kind of dishonesty to describe this childhood as a cage without first saying plainly that it was a warm one and a safe one, and that most of the country would have taken it without a moment's hesitation. And the narrowness was also real. You were raised 3 floors from your parents by a woman paid to do it. You were educated for a role rather than for yourself. You were taught to be pleasant, and the training took. And being pleasant is a genuine skill that also happens to be the thing that keeps you from ever saying the sentence you most want to say. Your intelligence, which was not smaller than your brother's, was directed into accomplishments that would decorate somebody's evening. And the one great decision of your life was arranged in a room you were not in. Both of these are true at the same hour, in the same house, about the same child. That is not a contradiction to be resolved. That is simply what it was to grow up rich in England in 1876. And the women who lived it knew it better than we do, and said so in letters and diaries, and eventually in novels, with a clarity that still gets underestimated. It is late now. The last of the day has gone out of the skylight, and the square below has emptied, and somewhere under your feet the front door has closed for the final time tonight. The nurse has been in with the candle. She has straightened the counterpane and set the tumbler of water where you can reach it, and moved the fire irons out of the way with her foot, the way she does. The grate is banked, coal laid over the red so that it will hold quietly until morning, and it gives just enough light to find the crack in the ceiling plaster that runs from the corner toward the window, and that you have looked at every night of your life. Downstairs, faintly, a chair scrapes. A door. The clock on the landing gathers itself and strikes, and the house settles, and the fire shifts once in the grate, and holds.